Good morning, I'm Kara Renee with Greater Portland, Inc. Thank you for joining us for today's Road to Recovery webinar. As part of the series, GPI has been partnering with the local office of global consulting firm Slalom to provide webinars called Leading Through Uncertainty to help companies and communities stay successful in working in a changed economy and in a virtual world. In our current economic environment, businesses need to adjust their strategies quickly to adapt to market shifts and demand, unpredictable customer behaviors, and emerging competition. So how do you use data to ensure you stick with the strategy that works and stop the strategy that won't? Today's experts from Slalom are going to help us find out. They're going to share how to conduct strategy scenario planning, approaches to building a data foundation, and how to deliver insights to the business. Our presenters are Jean-Marc Morelli. Jean-Marc is a leader in data and analytics in Portland and has helped organizations of all sizes unlock their potential to create and sustain a modern culture of data. He has helped organizations in healthcare, software, and utilities form data strategies, create more accessible and accurate data platforms, and deliver actionable stories for businesses. We also have Jocelyn Baumann. Jocelyn has built and managed analytics teams in supply chains and marketing functions. She has led technology implementations and has worked closely with IT throughout her career. Now she specializes in process improvement and helping clients define their operational strategies to meet future analytics needs. Sounds like a lot of expertise to me. We'd like this event to be conversational, so please go ahead and use the chat box during the presentation to ask questions, and they'll be addressed as we go along. Now I will hand it over to Jean-Marc and Jocelyn.
Thank you, Kara. Yeah, as Kara mentioned, my name is Jean-Marc, and can we go to the next slide here? Thank you. My name is Jean-Marc, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. My expertise, as you mentioned, is data and analytics, and I lead a team of just under 20 consultants. We do everything from strategy all the way through implementing with your end users, and really everything in between. And again, you gave Jocelyn a wonderful introduction as well. Jocelyn, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I think just in addition to the work that I'm doing with Slalom, I think the perspective that I bring, and I bring this to all my consulting engagements, is that I've actually been an analytics manager in a couple different scenarios, and so I know what it's like to have stakeholders asking you for data about things and some of the decisions you have to make, and some of the compromises that happen when you don't have perfect data. And how do you still kind of get to some good answers so that people can actually move forward and make decisions? So that's what I bring in terms of my experience.
Thanks, Jocelyn. So as we get started, I'd like to kick it off with a quick poll, which will be on the next slide here. And the reason I want to start with this is as we go through this presentation, I want everybody here to be tying this back to your organization. Every organization is encountering their own various challenges internally. They are all at different levels of maturity from a data standpoint. And this is a fairly simple question, but I want to start getting the juices going as you start to tie this back to your organization. And we're going to go through some mock scenarios to, again, make this a little bit more real. As Kara mentioned, this is a kind of a live conversation. So we encourage you to take the live approach. There's a chat window, or feel free to speak up. But we're happy to kind of talk through any questions you may have during the presentation. So let's go ahead and while we collate those results, let's go ahead and move on here. So our goal for today is that you leave here with a few things. First is confidence to direct your business and your data teams towards a single vision. Second, you have an understanding of what you can do with the resources, the data, the systems, the layout, the people that you already have today. What I find most often is that people have these resources in place and that really we can optimize what you already have. And then we can also talk about what to build upon in the future. But you really have potential today, I find in 99.9% of cases. And then also courage, right? To undertake something new, to delve into a new area using data, you really need courage to recognize your successes and, equally importantly, your failures very quickly. Next slide. So I'm not going to spend too long on this. We've all seen the headlines. We probably see them daily or hourly. But right now we're in a stressful, kind of scary, unpredictable time. All right. But there's also hope. Okay. And not only is there hope, there's actually data. In a 2019 poll of or survey of cities based on the 10-year recovery timeline from the 2008 crisis, based on a set of key metrics, unemployment rate, labor participation rate, poverty rate, et cetera, Portland actually was one of the top performers in that recovery. And so we believe that data is very important to understanding what success looks like, how you're pacing, and allow you to pivot your strategies, all of which we'll talk about more today. And in the name of data, actually, we'd love to pop up the survey and just see what those results were. Okay, this is promising. So what we're already seeing is that this group, 2/3 of you at least, are usually using data to drive your decision-making process, which is great. So let's go ahead and move on from here. I'm excited to get into the meat of today's content again. I want to begin with a quote. We've all heard the phrase, what got you here won't get you there. That's never been more true than right now. And I'd like to put a finer point on it in the form of Dr. Michael Ryan's quote, the executive director of the WHO, which is, if you need to be right before you move, you will lose. Speed trumps perfection. And what I don't want the group to take away is that we need to move fast recklessly, okay? There are ways to move fast with intention, and we want to show you what that looks like. So without further ado, let's talk about strategy. Jocelyn, take us away.
All right. So Slalom has definitely talked about strategy in other webinars that we've done, probably with this group and other folks as well. And we're going to talk about strategy a little bit here because strategy should be informing your actions, but it's going to be more from a perspective of strategy being the starting point for data collection and evaluating scenarios. So just very high level, somewhat quickly, just talking a little bit about strategic planning. And I think it's not a bad idea, especially for those of you who are on a yearly calendar, what you plan to have happen in 2020, back at the end of 2019 and in January, probably a lot of things have changed. You probably have already started to redo some of your strategic planning. And so it's a good idea to just kind of refresh on some of the key steps there. You know, is the team ready to kind of take a look at things and take a look at the current situation and evaluate where to go next? Assessing your current state. So certainly the current state that we are in right now is very different than the current state we were in back in January, and even different potentially from April of this year, just with the way that the world has changed and moves in different directions. So certainly understanding where you are now, and then what might happen in the future. And of course that can be a little bit challenging at this time, just because there are so many unknowns. But there are some things that we can take some reasonable guesses about and think about in terms of moving forward. And then after thinking about some of those scenarios and evaluating some of them, it's aligning on what direction do we think we want to go to, and also being aware that you might need to pivot. So given the circumstances that we're in right now, you might plan something out now and you might find in a couple months that you'll be pivoting again. And that's where what we're going to talk about with collecting data to evaluate scenarios is going to be very helpful. And then of course, creating the plan for your strategy. And really where we're going to focus today, as I mentioned, is really taking a look at your current state and then building out some scenarios of things that you might want to do to move your company or your organization in the direction that you'd like to go. So as John Mark mentioned earlier, we're going to use some local examples here. They're kind of mock scenarios. I would absolutely encourage you to take a moment to think of an issue that you're facing right now in your own organization. And you can kind of walk through these examples and play it out in your head as we go along, in addition to seeing what we're doing with our examples. So one of the examples we had was around Parks and Recreation Department. They had to cancel their summer camps and classes due to the state mandate on public gathering size. Another scenario that we could be looking at would be a local garden center. So they might be open, but the store traffic is down. Customers are complaining about the phone system and the website usability. Many nonprofits are struggling at the moment because a lot of people have either lost their job or are working reduced hours. And so individual donations may be down right now. And so trying to figure out what can be done to make up for some of that. And then I'm sure all of us are very aware the restaurant industry has been particularly hard hit by COVID, just by the nature of what dining out is. And so many restaurants have had to pivot from in-room dining to something different, because at the time when we originally talked about this, the state regulations only had allowed takeout. And even nowadays, most restaurants, there's a pretty severe cap on how many people you can have in at a time. So definitely still a lot of constraints there. So what we're going to do is talk about just high level a potential strategy. Certainly a lot of people have been looking at how can we leverage online activities, online tools during this time. So if we think about Parks and Recreation again, perhaps one way that we could address the fact that we can't do in-person classes would be to attempt to do online classes. The Garden Center, perhaps they need to look at their website. Maybe there's some things they can do to enhance that experience, since it appears that people are going to the website, they're just not finding it very useful. With the nonprofit, perhaps some virtual auctions, some other activities like that. You know, something that I've seen in my Facebook feed, I have Oregon Zoo, and they actually set up little videos with different animals in the zoo. So one day you might be seeing, you know, the baby bears, and the next day you might be seeing a sloth or something like that. And they'll actually turn that video into an opportunity for people to donate money. So they do these little episodes where you will have one of the employees of the zoo that will answer questions about the animal and get to see the animal. And so you see that with Oregon Zoo, where they're trying to make up at least for some of the money that they're losing by doing these online little sessions. And then the restaurant industry, you know, one option there is to engage Caviar, or to further optimize your website to make it easy for people to order online. So we're just going to focus for the rest of the presentation just on 2 examples. And so we're going to talk about Parks and Recreation. And so the first thing that we talked about there was that the strategy that they wanted to evaluate, the scenario they wanted to look at, was online classes. So the first thing you want to do, even before you start looking at data and trying to collect it, is to figure out, well, how would we know that we're successful with the online classes scenario? And so I just made up this success criteria. It would differ for your business, but in this case, what we said was success for this Parks and Recreation department would be that they would be able to generate enough revenue from online classes to cover the costs, and to also keep Parks and Rec programs front of mind, because, you know, hopefully we'll be having a different kind of scenario next summer, and we don't want people to forget about Parks and Rec for summer of 2021. And so the success criteria for this is translated to filling 80% of the available online seats. That's one way that you could go about setting up a metric. For the Garden Center, they had the issue with the website user experience. So for them, it might look more like we're able to offset some of the in-store sales drop by increasing sales to the web channel. And so their success criteria might be something like, we want to see the revenue from the sales from the web channel increase by 25%. So 2 different organizations, 2 different goals in mind, but they're both picking the same strategy, which is to go online. And defining at a very high level, this is what we think success looks like, and then coming up with a little bit of a success criteria to go with that. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to John Mark, because the next step after you define your scenarios and what success looks like is to go and collect some data to help you evaluate those scenarios.
That's right. And as Jocelyn just mentioned, as you develop these things, you really need a way to collect that data, right? So let's talk a little bit about that. You know, this is really critical for monitoring. Obviously, you can't monitor without something to look at. So let's talk about your data. You know, again, I mentioned this early on. The place we're coming from is work with what you have. Okay, a lot of organizations think, oh, if we only had this, you know, more modern platform, if we had, you know, this person, or if we had this particular skill set, or whatever it might be. Let me tell you this, you can always be more mature in your usage of data, but that said, you can almost always start from where you're at today. And so let's talk about what that looks like. First of all, as you align on your strategies, your success criteria for those strategies, you need to then engage with your data team. And so executives, leaders, first align on strategic objectives. And this is with, again, your technical team, whether that's your technical team leadership or your full technical team, whatever they may look like. This might be, you may not have a data leader per se, but you've got a one or more analysts that help you solve problems with data. Pull them into a room and talk about your strategic objectives. Start with how they've changed from previous objectives, okay? And this other part is kind of important and is a theme throughout the section, which is don't feel the need to shield or exclude the business context from your technical team. Oftentimes, people in the data space, though they may be more technical, have been working in your business and have been working with your data long enough to have a sense of what the kind of key components of your business are. So it's okay, for instance, to let them know how you came to this hypothesis. Why did we form the strategy the way we did from a business context? The more context you can give, the more self-driven your data teams will be because they have that information in their pocket, as they encounter challenges with the data. All right. So then let's outline the success criteria. What are the supporting measures for your strategy? What does good look like? And also, what time horizon are you on? That is very important. If you think about a fail fast mentality, that means when something isn't working, you can't wait a year, right? You can't wait. Sometimes you can't even wait a month. You need to know as soon as possible if it's working or not and hit those checkpoints. So make sure to clearly outline that because that'll inform their technical work plan as they begin to collect the data. And then the last step is very important, which is authorize your teams to take action, okay? So don't, as a non-technical executive or even as a technical executive, make sure your teams are a part of the process to estimate what this is going to look like. What are the time and resources required to do the work? Be proactive in identifying any roadblocks they may encounter, and with your team, work through those roadblocks. And this last one is really hard, but it is crucial, which is deprioritize other work explicitly. I have 0 times in my entire career encountered an IT team on a new project that said, hey, we've got lots of time. We're not doing anything right now, right? No, of course, your IT team, your technical teams usually have quite a bit on their plate. Usually they're 3 months out from a roadmap perspective. Make sure you're actually with them, talking through the priorities and saying, nope, that was a priority under this new strategy that is no longer a priority. If you do that, you're now authorizing your teams and enabling them to take action. Okay, so now you as an executive team have really outlined the path. What is your technical team going to begin doing? First of all, they're going to bring data in, right? So they're going to prioritize the systems and the data sets based on the criticality by which you define from your measures. And again, work with what you have. Some companies have a highly mature cloud methodology. You've got a cloud platform, you're using AWS, you've got AWS Redshift, you're using some modern ETL tools to bring that in. And some people have a shared drive on a shared folder out there somewhere where you can access Excel files. Start with what you have, make sure you're being clear about what you need, and then you lead to the next step, which is identify areas of gaps and richness in the data. As you pull this data in, you're going to realize that as you map that data to your business cases or to your success criteria, that some of that data is not very good, okay? One example might be for the parks department, they want to fill 80% of those seats. Well, you might realize that, for the west side region or southwest side region, those parks, we haven't implemented any systems for them, or it's all full of part-time staffers that don't know how to use the systems very well. So we kind of know the data from those groups is going to be a little kludgy. But our Northeast regional parks, they've had the right systems in place, a registration system in place for years. They've got a full-time person on staff or more than one full-time person on staff, and they're very good at entering that data. So we know that that's very rich data. You need to understand that as you kind of go through this process so you're not using kludgy data in your success criteria. And also areas of richness are very important as well. And then you need to communicate your findings back to the stakeholders, okay? It's important that the business and the technical data team are highly aligned throughout this process. Again, even if that's a single business person and you've got one analyst on your team, they need to be highly aligned throughout this process. Let's talk about what that alignment actually looks like. So first, we need to categorize systems and data by criticality, right? If you say you have a highly critical success measure, then any data or systems pertinent to that would be highly critical. And then you categorize by data availability, right? Can you get to this data? Is it easily accessible? Is it really hard to get at, right? We need to identify those early and often, okay? And then we kind of get to that area of richness and gaps. That's where you start categorizing by reliability, right? Okay, we can get to this data and it's highly critical. Can we rely on it? All right, now you're starting to create a sense of what data you can actually use. And the data that you cannot use, you then move into this more iterative process called data remediation. So for those highly critical data sets that may have low availability or reliability, we need to find a way to address that issue, right? Can we apply specific business rules to that data to make it more rich and more usable? Can these rules be applied within the right time horizon, right? We established that early on. You need to do this in time. So then as you move through those steps, that's data remediation. You arrive to a point where your highly critical data is at a place where you can begin measuring against your strategy, how to do the handoff. And this is really a two-parter. First is make sure you're documenting your discussions, documenting the data, documenting what you're doing, because people will need to come back and look at this. I can't tell you how many times I've looked at code that was not documented and sat there for, hours trying to figure out what in the heck these guys were trying to do before me, right? That's very important. And then the next thing is, as you go through this process, you're going to encounter those things that are nice to have. I mentioned early on, work with what you have, but again, you can always improve. So when you think about those improvements that are not highly critical for your success criteria, put those in the back burner. Don't forget about those. Those might be things that you can revisit and at some point realize, oh, you know what, if we do this, we can get better insights in the future, okay? So let's go ahead and revisit our scenarios. How does that apply for preparing your data? Okay, I talked about criticality. I'm gonna give you some examples. So for the Parks and Recreation example, we know that we need to fill 80% of online seats. So registration data is critical. You can't do this without registration data. But as we went through this process, we found that, historic class attendance would be helpful. It would help us baseline what our expectations should be, right? If in person, again, going back to our Northeast, Southwest examples, if your Southwest regional parks have historically low attendance, then you shouldn't expect that your online seats are going to really fill up to 80%, right? If anything, the engagement is lower, so that helps you at least base on a set expectations. If your Northeast parks have historically had high registration, again, very helpful for you to understand, and that would indicate that there's something problematic with your strategy if you don't kind of achieve a similarly high online registration rate. And then demographics could also be helpful for you to, again, hone in on your strategies down the road. Again, we're always thinking about what happens if the strategy succeeds, and then what happens if it fails, or what happens if it's not quite good enough. In any one of those scenarios, we need to revisit and hone the strategy, right? For the local garden center, we're looking at revenue, and we're looking at revenue through different channels. So your POS data, critical, right? You absolutely need that. It might also be helpful for you to have customer data to, again, further hone your expectations and your targets. Not critical, absolutely, for your one success criteria, but important. So this is an example of how you might go through your systems and your data sets to understand, overall criticality. And so now you have the data.
Oops.
You have your people looking at the data. So what's next?
And I got so excited to talk about evaluating results that I jumped ahead of John Mark, but yes, that's where we're at now. So you have some data, you're able to actually run some numbers and look at things. And so really what you want to do here is you want to use data and analysis to discard the scenarios that aren't working. And then for the things that do seem to be working, you might want to take the time to build some more robust reporting tools for those things that you do think are worth continuing and that you want to continue to measure. And one thing I do want to say here is it kind of goes along with the theme of use what you have. Sometimes people think that they have to do a lot of really advanced analytics and if they can't do those things, then they might as well not do anything at all. And I would say that, again, start with what you have. Sometimes just understanding your past trends in a very basic way is really helpful. And so don't get too wrapped up in trying to do, all the fancy stuff. So now that you have some data, you need to confirm if it's going to help you fulfill the vision and the strategy and the scenario that you wanted to test early on. So again, you want to revisit the success criteria and the KPIs that you originally defined. See if those measures still ring true now that you understand your data. So for example, John Mark was talking about the registration information and having some of that historical information for Parks and Rec. You know, if you find out that you set a success criteria of 80%, but in certain parts of your territory, you've never had 80% of your seats filled, whether it's in person or online, you might need to adjust your metrics a little bit there with that new information. Understand the gaps in your data and determine how you're going to mitigate those gaps. But the one thing I would say is don't change your measures just because you have an incomplete data set. Sometimes what people want to do is they want to measure what they have data for, but that measure may not be the thing that drives your business or informs the success of your strategy. What you have to do, and I've had to do this myself when I've managed analytics teams, is sometimes you have to make some logical assumptions for the places where you don't have complete data sets. And you'll want to make sure you document them, and you need to understand the impact of not having complete data, but don't let that stop you from trying to go after the thing that you think is the true and accurate measure of your strategy. And then you want to make sure that everyone understands these measures, how they're calculated, how they're reported, how they're used in decision making. And that sometimes means, depending on the size of your organization, that there may be some people who don't typically interface with IT that maybe learn a little bit more about where their data comes from and the systems and how it's put together. It could also mean, as John Mark mentioned earlier, that you want your technical people to understand what are we driving towards as a business. And so I think it's really important that everybody have some basic understanding of strategy and what's being measured. And the other thing that I would advocate for is to build out solutions to begin learning from your data relatively quickly. And again, you don't need to get super fancy here at first. And so, you know, I'm a big believer in starting with ad hoc solutions. A spreadsheet can be perfectly acceptable, especially when you're trying to very quickly evaluate something. And it's really just to get started. If you happen to have some dashboarding tools like Tableau or something like that, you can certainly build something there. But I think I would just caution against getting too carried away with designing something very complex, because really what you want to figure out at this point is what we're measuring even the right thing to measure. So just get started with whatever you have. And then you want to embed and the things that you're measuring in behaviors and in your meetings. So as you're meeting with your team, whether that's an executive team or if it's people on the ground, people involved in sales, people involved in community outreach, whoever those people are, you want to keep talking about what you're seeing with the data, what kind of numbers are coming out, what does it mean to all of you as members of your organization. And just a quick example here, we worked early on in the COVID situation, Slalom worked with a client in Seattle, and they needed to learn they needed to understand their PPE supplies and inventory. And Slalom consultant spent a weekend putting together some dashboards and some very quick views of the data that they did have. And that allowed them to start thinking about what they had and understand their inventory situation. And then they went on later to build some refinements and enhancements into it. But it is something that you can do quickly. And I would encourage you to do that when you're first starting out. And so you do want to maintain consistency while you evolve through these iterations. If you keep changing the metrics or the scale or things like that, it becomes harder to see trends. So I would recommend that unless you have something that you uncover with your data that requires a restatement, to generally kind of stay the course for the duration of the scenario that you're trying out. So back to our fictional world with our two examples, we have some time passing between when they implemented these two online strategies. And now we're going to bring it back to what was the results of their going online strategy and how do we think about it from a data perspective. So what did we discover? So Parks and Recreation, as you recall, they had to cancel in-person classes. They decided to do some online classes, and their success criteria was to fill 80% of available online seats. The results, 13% of available seats filled. So this clearly did not meet the success criteria. It didn't even come close. And so this is the sort of thing that then as a leadership team, and as other folks who are involved in the organization, you have a conversation about what do we think this means. It could be that Parks and Recreation summer camp just doesn't translate online. That's absolutely something that could happen. It could also be that perhaps the outreach and the marketing of it wasn't robust enough, and so maybe people just didn't know about it. There could be a lot of reasons why that happened, and so that's the kind of stuff that you talk through as a team. And what may come out of that discussion is that you want to try another scenario or something slightly different, and then that would lead you to go back and do the same exercise with seeing, do we have some data to understand what we're trying to do, and then you would track another scenario. For the Garden Center, they wanted to improve their website user experience, and their success criteria was to increase revenue from sales through the web channel, and their measure there was 25%, and they actually achieved 27%. So in this particular case, it seems like those website enhancements did result in some positive momentum for the business. And so what this organization may decide to do is they may say, you know what, we think we're onto a good thing here. Let's take a look, because when they redid their website, they probably had a list of nice to do things. They may go back and say, you know what, let's add in some additional enhancements because we've seen that it does work when we make improvements. And so they might look at that, but they're probably going to continue with this strategy because they've seen some initial results that are positive. And so I talked earlier about when you're first looking at the numbers that are coming out of your new metrics and your new analysis, that you can kind of just do something sort of quick and dirty. But at the same time, once you start to identify things that you think are valuable measures for your scenarios, you do want to start thinking about how can we make these a little bit more automated, a little bit more user-friendly. And this is where you can start thinking in terms of some other solutions. So if you think of a scale around ease of access and value to the business, a one-off analysis, it definitely has value to the business. I think it's a great way to get started on testing out a hypothesis. The ease of access is not great because it's probably a couple people that are pulling data from multiple places and somebody putting together a spreadsheet. If you can move to standard reports, you've at least automated some of the data collection and the analysis, and then you can have those sent out on a regular basis. And so that increases the value to the business because they get to see the same numbers on a very regular basis, and it helps them really kind of bond with the metrics that you've identified. And then if you really think about, you know, ease of access and high value to the business would be things along the lines of self-service analytics. And those can be things like dashboards or on-demand reporting. Certainly from an ease of access, it's great because you don't have to worry about scheduling jobs and sending out reports or having a human send them out. People can just go in and look at a dashboard or something like that whenever they're interested. And that allows too, depending on how you build out your dashboards, it might allow for a little bit of individual data exploration if you build in some basic drill down capabilities and things like that. So as I said, self-service analytics makes key metrics easily available to everyone who needs to act on them, and it does free up your data and analysis teams to uncover new insights. And so for the things that are most important, and I don't think it needs to be everything that you're measuring, but for the things that are most important and that you're going to do on a regular basis, try to move to some kind of model for self-service, because then your analysts and your tech folks aren't spending all their time basically trying to pull together the same report every week or every month. People can go get that report, and that allows those teams to go investigate other questions that you might have. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to John Mark to wrap up our discussion today.
Thank you, Jocelyn.
Oops.
Yeah, so let's talk about what we're seeing. You know, between Jocelyn and I, we've got, you know, quite a few different organizations from different industries under our belts in terms of data and analytics. You know, and certainly Slalom as a whole. So let's talk about some trends that we're seeing here. I'm not going to read at you. I will just say, you know, kind of I've bolded a few that I think this group might find helpful. The first is focus on business analysis and decision making. And what that means is, you know, a lot of times it takes quite a lot of effort to get at the data, to get to the analytics. How do you focus on getting your organization to a place where you can be spending more time doing analysis and more time getting insights about your business and less time really just getting at the data? All right, that's a big trend that we're seeing. The other one is getting faster insights is really important. I worked with a client recently or an organization recently that it took them about a month and a half to get insights about their kind of current customers. And that was causing some pretty big issues for them when it came down to kind of quarterly and annual planning. So how do we then turn that into something where we need to ask ourselves questions about our customers on a daily or weekly basis and get an answer real time, right? So speed is a big one. And just in line with that is reporting centers oftentimes are built as a place to go and get any possible data point that you need. There's a time and a place for that for your more analytically minded folks. But for most people in your business, they really just need a few kind of KPIs to run their day-to-day and week-to-week actions with their team. So in order to do that, we see a lot of people trimming things down. Don't try to boil the ocean, and don't try to give everybody every data point, because oftentimes you can drown them with that. Give people the KPIs that really move the needle, and find ways to kind of obfuscate the details underneath that unless they need to drill down for some reason. And then as people begin to get a lot of those things figured out within their organization, then there's a real effort to embed that into processes. And you can do that through advanced analytics pretty easily. Well, I shouldn't say easily. You can do it through advanced analytics, provided you have the right skill set. And once you're doing that, you really want to embed it in your business day-to-day process so that people are actually using it as an embedded behavior rather than say, something that gets built and it's kind of shelfware, right? If you focus on a lot of these different areas that I outlined, what you're going to find is that your organization is going to ultimately use data more effectively, and it's not going to be something where you've got a team and only one person really uses it, because we find that that's very ineffective and frankly quite expensive, right? People make large investments in data. How do you make sure that those are sticky? These are a few areas you could focus on and make sure that is sticky and really effective in your organization. So I'd like to wrap today's webinar up with just a quick call to action. What does this look like for you? So the first thing to do is understand where you're at today. What ability does your organization have to collect and analyze data? How often are you using data to actually drive real decision-making about your business, right? Are you shooting from the hip? Are you going with your gut feel? There's actually a value to intuition. What I usually find is that where data and intuition contradict each other is where you have a real opportunity within your business to improve. So this is a good starting point. And then, how long are you waiting to see data about your business? All right. In the example I gave earlier, if you're waiting a month and a half to see critical data about your customers, again, quarterly, annual planning, that's a really tough task to do without the data. So then from there, you actually have a place to start and actually take action. So remember, your level of maturity is not a roadblock. It's just a starting point, right? If you're using a shared drive with Excel sheets, okay, that's a starting point. Is there a way you can better collect that and collate that data together, right? The other one is build consensus in your organization around the need for data. Do other leaders in your organization also agree that you need data, or do they not, and why? It's a good discussion to have. It usually needs to be something that's very intentional, where you're setting aside time to have it. Once you have that consensus about using data, now you can actually start getting the right people in the room to take action, right? So that's where you clarify that vision as the leadership team for your people, and then you can begin to realize your strategy through data. So as I said earlier on, we love for these things to be more conversational, if you're open to it. So I'd be curious if there's any questions from the group. We can leave a few minutes here for those. If you have those, feel free to speak up either in chat or just on the meeting. Okay, it's a quiet group. Well, if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to email Jocelyn or myself. We're more than happy to respond and help you think through problems. We regularly meet with people in the community just to see what's happening, what you're doing, what challenges you're facing. That's not a consulting engagement. That's just, hey, tell me what you're seeing. And one of the things I love to do is be a connector among different people in an industry or across industries to talk about what problems you're facing. So more than happy to do that. Again, feel free to reach out at any time.
Okay, well, not seeing any questions. I'm still looking. Final call for questions. No. John Mark and Jocelyn, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us and providing all this great content to GPI partners. Reminding those that are still on the call that these are recorded, and we encourage you to share this content with your colleagues who aren't able to make it maybe at this time. We will send out the link again in the investor newsletter and continue to do that. So there's always an opportunity to absorb this content, even if you can't see it live. And so thank you both again. Really appreciate Slalom's partnership on this, and we will see everybody soon. Take care and have a great day.